Hello, and welcome back to the Homeschool STEM Episode 2 of the Polar Express Conversion Project. If you remember back at the end of Episode 1, which was our overview of what our project goals were or what we hope to do, we were looking at the Polar Express locomotive, the train set ready to play battery operated that runs on 6 C-cell batteries. And our idea here was to convert from the 6 C-cell batteries to a USB connected power pack. So what we want to do today is to look at what our electrical connections are going to need to be for the locomotive. And if you remember back to our previous video, we have access to our batteries on the inside with the firebox cover, the original firebox cover, and then we can slide the battery case out of the inside of the locomotive. Now our original idea was to take this battery case and recreate it and then 3D print it, which ultimately we did do. And we had our connections for our electrical connections. Obviously, the batteries, 6 C-cell batteries in series, for 9 volts that connected on this end and slid into the locomotive. What we found out was that when we redesigned or re-engineered this battery case was that the tolerances on this battery case are very tight inside the locomotive. And when we slid in our second re-engineered case, it didn't line up as accurately as it should have. So we had to come back and rethink the whole process. And what we've come up with is rather than recreating the battery case, we'll leave the current battery case as it is. So if we ever want to go back to the original setting, we can. So we're going to set that battery case aside. What we want to look at today is the electrical connections with the motor, the electric motor that turns inside. So let's make some room here on our bench. We're going to flip up our locomotive and we're going to take the screws off of the bottom of the gear case. Now make sure as you do this that you don't lose those screws because you're going to need them again when we reassemble the whole thing. So take our screws out, lift out our cover, and set it aside. And as you can see, we've got our set of wheels. We've got a gear system that is driving or being driven by a 6-volt motor. Even though 9 volts is what is going into the system from the batteries. It's running off the 6-volt. What's your additional amount for? Well, you've got a headlight, you've got a firebox light, you have some whistle sounds, all which is going to take power. So for option 1, what we want to do is we're going to lift out these wheels, and they are all one piece. And set that aside very carefully. And we can see that our drive gear is resting on top of a worm gear on the motor. So we're going to set our drive gear aside. And then before I pull that out, you can see that our gear and our worm gear sits down in a space inside the locomotive. And what we're wanting to do is we're gonna, for option 1, is to tie directly to our positive and our negative connections on our motor, and we're gonna run a wire up to and through the space where the battery case was. And then we're going to tie into a 2.1 millimeter plug in our redesigned battery case cover that will fasten in, and we can plug and unplug then a connector cable to our backpack or battery pack. So let's take a look at this. If I lift out that motor, you can see that we have a positive and a negative connection. Now the question comes back to if we're wanting to keep the original wiring for the original batteries, then how are we going to connect that back through? Right now, these 2 wires go up and go to the spring connectors inside of the case for the C-cell batteries. If we wanted to tie into and just solder an additional wire here and run it up through, we could, and then run it through rather than desoldering and then soldering new wires on. If we do that, then if we ever want to come back to our C-cell batteries, then we've got to open this case back up and resolder these 2 original wires. So what we're going to do is we're going to just tag on a couple more wires onto this. Now in order to run those wires, we've drilled a 1/4-inch hole in our bottom of the space where our gears are, which goes into the space allowed for the 6 C-cell battery tray. We're going to feed our wires through the end and up through our hole. So we need to feed those wires down through. We'll just take a piece of 18-gauge standard wire, and we want to feed that through the hole and run it all the way out the end of our firebox. There we go. Once we have our wire fed through the hole in the bottom and through our firebox, now we need to strip off the ends because we're going to need to solder those wires. Just tack solder them right on there. So we want to strip off some of the insulation. I usually take about a half an inch, just as a general rule. Some people probably take more. Some people probably take a little less. Whatever your preference is. This is stranded wire. Again, 18 gauge. 18 gauge is common size used for speaker wire. As you can see, I've used wire that is marked red and black. You don't have to. I mean, it can all be the same color, but you just have to remember which one is your positive wire and which one is your negative wire. Now I want to come back and tack on my wires to my motor, and again, I'm going to use my soldering iron and connect those wires to each side. That's the red wire. And we'll do the same thing on the black wire. That one just doesn't want to cooperate. But take your time. Patience is something we need to make sure we follow. Still not quite on there. Yeah, I didn't think so. Making sure we don't melt our plastic case as well on the motor. So we don't want to damage that. There we go. All right. So we have our wires connected. With our wires connected, then we can take our motor and set it back in place, just like it was before. Let's get our wires in place there and reset our drive gear. Then reset our wheels. And when we do this, we have to make sure that we slide everything together back the way it was. put our cover back in place. And if you wanted, now would be a good time to put a little bit of silicone lubricant on your gears. It's as good a time as any. You had your fingers on it, so you might have a little bit of lube on your fingers. Like, right now, I can feel I do. But now would be a good time to add some. But since I'm trying to show you the balance of this, we won't do that. I'll come back and do that later. We go back and put our screws back in place. If you notice, I'm fastening 3 screws down. That'll keep it in place. Notice there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total, and I have the other ones. But I'm fastening these 3 down to keep the case assembled and in place. But rather than putting all of them, and then if I have to adjust something, taking all 6 out, but by only putting 3 in, that fastens it securely, and I can go ahead with what I'm going to do. And later if I need to adjust it, I like to add the lubricant. I only have 3 to take out. Once I'm completely done, I'll come back and add those other screws and make sure everything is aligned. Make sure everything's tight. All right. So we've got that together. Now our next step. So you can see we have our wire reattached to our motor coming out. We need to attach that to our 2.1 millimeter female plug so that it all fits together. This new firebox cover will fit right over top of where the old one was. Again, I'm not using the original firebox cover because to do that I'd have to drill a hole in it to accept that female power plug. I want to keep this original so that if I ever go back to the original setup, I have the original battery tray and the original firebox ready to go. It's just a matter of tucking these wires in out of the way inside or clipping them off. Okay, so we're going to set this aside with our original battery box. And our next step is to solder our wires together for our 2.1 plug to our wires that are going to our motor. That completes option 1 for wiring the battery. Now there is another way to wire the battery. I am calling this option 2, depending on how you want to do it. I have taken apart the top part of the locomotive and opened it up where you can see the 2 spring terminals where the battery case fits into. The original battery case came in and fit here. Now what we did previously in option 1 was to attach our wire to the other side of this into our motor down in here. This is where our motor sits. But by doing that, we're bypassing the switch on the top and any of the light and sounds. All our power is going to our motor. So for option 1, which is fine if that's what you're wanting to do, you will have power constantly on. Maybe you want to design your railroad where it's running all the time. But in order to have the switch and the headlights and everything and whistles work off of the switch, we're going to need to tie into here using option 2. So our wire that we tied into with our 2.1 millimeter plug needs to be trimmed off and soldered right here. So let's do that. We're going to trim off, leave just a little bit. So if we need to come back to that later on again, this is all about options. We're going to get our wire ready and trim off about a ½ inch off the end. Let's put our stranded wire together. And we're going to tack these wires right into red to red, black to black. Just like before. Let's add a little bit of solder there. It's taking a little bit more solder because the original wire coming from, we're going to the motor, was a little short from the factory. So when I heated that solder up, it wanted to pull off. This one did the same thing, but that's all right. You can tack it back on there. There we go. All right. So we tack those wires on. Now we can reassemble this, and we'll plug in, and we'll do a quick test of option 2 as to making sure everything's working. Next, we're ready to attach our 2.1 millimeter female power plug to the wires coming to our motor. So as you can see, I've already stripped off insulation off each one, and obviously our connections are black to black, red to red, and we're going to do just like we've done before. We're going to take 2 pieces of heat shrink. We're going to slide those on first. If we don't slide them on first, we're going to be cutting those apart and resoldering those wires because we won't be able to get the heat shrink on. Slide those down out of the way. And then we're going to twist our wires together here. And again, you can either do it in line twist or you can do what I call twist-tie twist and then flatten them out. I prefer a lot of times to use the twist-tie twist and then flatten it out. But that's me. You might decide that you like to do it in line, or you may have another method. If you do, put it down in the comment section, and I'll be curious to hear what that is and give it a try. So let's twist those together. Now what we want to do is we want to solder those together. So, again, we need something to solder on. Take our soldering iron. Heat up our wire. And melt our solder to our wire. Right now we have to be careful because that's still going to be hot when we go to touch it. Let's set our shield aside here. We need to flatten out our wires. Slide our heat shrink over top, and again, those are approximately 3/4 of an inch to an inch long. You don't need to have a whole length of it enough to cover your connection. Then take our heat gun. And as you can see, it's shrinking down in size. Grabbing a hold of that solder connection. Providing insulation. All right. Now, as you can see, we've got our 2.1 millimeter connector connected to our wire that came down through that we tied into our electric motor, our drive motor with our drive gears. Next step is to take our firebox cover, and I probably have a little bit more wire there than I need, but I want to be able to take that off at any point in time if I need to do some additional work inside that battery case. So we're going to tuck those wires down inside. Slide our battery cover on and tighten down our screw, holding it in place. And that is our rewiring of our locomotive with option 1 and option 2. The idea being we will put a 2.1 male plug into that and run it to our battery bank. Now we have our locomotive all reassembled. As you can see, we've got the bottom carriage and everything back on. Let's do a quick check. I've plugged in a 2.1 into our female connector. I'm just going to touch with a 9-volt battery because we know that's what the system was set up for. Let's see if we get any response. Okay, the beep means that the locomotive is looking for the remote control and it hasn't connected yet to it. But I'm making good contact. Let's shut the switch off and do the same check. We should hear nothing. Right, so we are working on our switch. Our switch is working, which tells me that everything is connected and working correctly, as you can see. So we're good there. So we've made our positive and our negative connections to our locomotive. Remember, I gave you two options on your electrical connections. The first one was going directly to the motor on the locomotive. This is considered the Berkshire locomotive. There may be some models that require you to go directly to the motor like we did in option 1. Alright, now that we've reassembled our locomotive, we've got all electrical connections for the locomotive. And again, I tested this with a 9-volt battery because we know that's a 9-volt system, which consists of 6 C-cell batteries rated at 1.5 volts each, which equals 9 volts total. I suppose you could use a rechargeable 9-volt battery if you wanted to do it that way. This project, though, is to reassemble after we created our new electrical connections, and our goal is to use a rechargeable battery bank to plug into our system. So we still have to make up a cable to go from our 2.1 into our battery bank. And then where are we going to locate the battery bank? In next week's video, we will start looking at what our needs are for a connector cable and where in the coal car that follows the locomotive are we going to locate the battery bank? And how are we going to adapt it without cannibalizing the coal car? So until next time, thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please like this video and click on the homeschool STEM icon at the bottom right and subscribe to our channel. And if you have comments or suggestions that you think would help the project, please feel free to add those comments and suggestions at the bottom. Until next time, we hope we'll see everybody on episode 3.